At its height, the Mughal Empire governed more people and collected more revenue than any state in the world. It paid armies on time. It administered vast territories. It ruled without constant rebellion. This was not luck. And it was not just conquest, it was taxation, a system so effective that it turned fields into silver, silver into soldiers, and soldiers into stability. For a time, it looked like the future of governance. Before the Mughals, revenue across much of South Asia was uncertain. Harvests varied. Assessments were negotiated. Power depended on personal authority more than records. The Mughal state changed that. Taxes were no longer improvised. They were planned. Land was measured. Output was estimated. Obligations were recorded. What peasants owed was calculated in advance, not argued after the fact. Capacity replaced improvisation. Where a bad harvest once threatened the state itself, now ledgers absorbed the shock. The empire could forecast income, plan expenses, and move resources across vast distances with confidence. This ability to count reliably was power. The Mughal system accepted a simple reality. Land was the primary source of wealth. Instead of fighting that, the state organized around it. Revenue was assessed directly on agricultural output. Taxes scaled with productivity. When land produced more, the state gained more. When it produced less, extraction adjusted. This made revenue broad, regular, and dependable. Power no longer depended on squeezing trade or confiscating wealth after conquest. It flowed steadily from the countryside into the state, season after season. Land became the foundation of authority. This system did not rely on constant force. It relied on administration. Officials recorded, audited, and enforced revenue claims. Procedures mattered more than personalities. Power came from paperwork as much as from swords. Authority became procedural. Because rules were predictable, resistance was limited. Because obligations were known, enforcement was selective rather than constant. Administration multiplied force without expanding violence. A state that pays on time attracts loyalty. Soldiers were paid regularly. Officials were compensated reliably. Elites were integrated into a system that delivered predictable returns. Taxation created endurance, and endurance looked like legitimacy. The empire did not feel fragile. It felt organized. Capable, permanent, its revenue system absorbed shocks that would have shattered weaker states. Crisis became accounting, not collapse. Success reinforced confidence, but systems that work this well do more than raise revenue. They shape behavior. They reward those who master extraction. They concentrate ambition around what pays. They make success depend on doing more of the same. Over time, power became inseparable from the ability to extract. The system did not just fund the empire, it trained it, and that training would matter later. If taxation made the Mughal state powerful, what happens when staying powerful requires squeezing more and more from the same land, even when it can no longer give? If you're the kind of person who likes seeing how systems quietly shape history, not just battles and rulers, then this is the kind of story we tell here. If that sounds like you, like the video and subscribe. As the Mughal system matured, taxation stopped being just a tool of governance. It became the measure of authority itself. Power was no longer defined mainly by lineage or territory. It was defined by how much revenue an official could deliver to the center, on time and without disruption. Promotion followed performance. Failure meant demotion, reassignment, or removal. What mattered most was not where you ruled, but what you produced for the state. Authority became conditional, renewable, and measurable. This raised the stakes. Revenue was no longer background administration. It became the test of survival inside the imperial hierarchy. The Jagirdari system formalized this logic. Officials were not paid fixed salaries. Instead, they were granted temporary rights to collect revenue from specific lands. Their income depended on how much they could extract before reassignment. This created urgency. There was little incentive to invest in irrigation, soil quality, or village stability. Those benefits would accrue to whoever came next. The rational strategy was to collect efficiently and quickly. Revenue became portable. Responsibility did not. The land remained. The extractor moved on. Rank within the empire, the mansab tied ambition directly to revenue. Higher rank required higher income. Higher income required control over richer or more productive land. Each promotion raised expectations, not security. For an official, this shaped daily behavior. Each year became a test. Shortfalls threatened status. Surpluses signaled reliability. Loyalty was measured in numbers, not words. Advancement meant managing larger flows of tax, not building durable local systems. The safest way up the hierarchy was to deliver more of what the empire already counted. From the center, the system looked elegant. Revenue arrived predictably. Armies were paid. Administration expanded. The court could plan months and years ahead, but locally, incentives thinned, officials rotated frequently. Accountability to cultivators weakened. Maintenance mattered less than meeting targets. Long-term productivity lost priority to immediate extraction. The system moved wealth upward efficiently, but it was indifferent to what it left behind. Stability at the top rested on thinning margins below. As extraction proved effective, it crowded out other paths to power. Military loyalty depended on pay. Administrative influence depended on revenue delivery. Political favor followed fiscal performance. The empire did not forbid long-term development. It simply failed to reward it. Fewer elites invested in improvement. Fewer experiments were attempted. Fewer risks made sense. The safest strategy was repetition. Extraction became not just common, but dominant. This alignment produced remarkable strength, but it also hardened behavior. The more the system worked, the more everyone depended on it continuing unchanged. Any slowdown threatened rank, income, and status. Reform felt dangerous. Stability came from doing the same thing again. The empire became extremely good at extracting revenue and increasingly dependent on that single capacity. If power depends on extraction, what happens when success begins to exhaust the land and people beneath it? By the early 18th century, the Mughal revenue system was still working. Taxes were collected, armies were paid, administration continued without interruption, but success had quietly changed what the system demanded. Revenue targets were based on past performance, not present conditions. What had once been treated as an upper limit slowly hardened into an expectation. Years of strong collection were not remembered as exceptional. They became the new normal. Targets rose easily. They almost never fell. Falling short no longer meant misfortune. It meant failure. Once success redefined the baseline, the system could only ratchet in one direction. When pressure increased, it did not spread evenly across society. It concentrated downward. Peasants faced higher assessments, tighter collection schedules, and fewer allowances for bad harvests. A weak monsoon did not reduce expectations. It triggered closer scrutiny. To meet demands, households borrowed, land was mortgaged, grain reserves disappeared earlier each year. Some cultivators fled altogether, leaving fields underworked. The peasantry absorbed volatility, so the center could preserve predictability. What looked like fiscal stability at the top was sustained by mounting insecurity at the bottom. At the same time, pressure intensified among elites. Jagirdars competed for high-yield assignments. Mansabdars sought promotions that required higher revenue remittances. Each layer passed demands downward to protect its own position. No single actor escalated extraction out of malice. Each responded rationally to incentives shaped by a system that equated power with revenue delivery. Competition did not produce efficiency. It produced compression. More pressure was applied to the same land, by more actors more often. Over time, this logic eroded local incentives. Why invest in land you would not hold? Why preserve soil or irrigation when assignments were temporary? Why cultivate cooperation when restraint carried no reward? Short tenures discouraged investment. Low investment reduced yields. Lower yields triggered higher extraction pressure. The feedback loop tightened. Villages weakened. Productivity fell. Trust between cultivators and officials thinned. The system still collected revenue, but at rising social and economic cost. Extraction continued. Resilience did not. Eventually, these distortions reached the military. Armies remained large, but loyalty became conditional. Commanders depended on uninterrupted pay. Delays produced unrest, desertion, or defection. Revenue efficiency now produced fragility. Because loyalty was no longer rooted in land or identity, only in payment, any disruption carried immediate consequences. Campaigns cost more to sustain. Control required constant fiscal pressure. The empire looked strong on paper, yet required increasing effort to remain coherent. Crucially, the system lacked a way to correct itself. There was no incentive to lower extraction voluntarily. No reward for long-term stabilization. No institutional path to change priorities without weakening authority. What had once built capacity now narrowed options. The empire was not collapsing. It was overextending itself through success. The system still functioned, but only by deepening the very distortions that undermined loyalty, productivity, and cohesion. If extraction kept the empire strong, what happened when that same logic began to weaken loyalty, stability, and control at the same time? By the early 18th century, the Mughal tax system was still operating. Revenue continued to move upward. Accounts were kept. Officials still extracted what was demanded of them. On paper, the machinery of the empire remained intact. But the same system that once produced cohesion was now producing the opposite effect. Extraction no longer bound the empire together. It pulled it apart. the state could still take resources from society. What it could no longer do was align interests around a shared future. The incentives that once encouraged cooperation now rewarded separation. Revenue still moved. Authority did not. This was not breakdown through failure. It was breakdown through continued success, operating under conditions it was never designed to correct. The military revealed this shift first. Loyalty had become fully transactional. Soldiers and commanders depended on regular payment rather than long-term attachment to land, dynasty, or identity. Under these conditions, fiscal delay became political risk. A late payment weakened authority immediately. A disrupted remittance created hesitation. Commanders began calculating loyalty in months, not generations. Revenue pressure created pay dependency. Pay dependency created loyalty volatility. Military power now required constant extraction to sustain itself and weakened rapidly the moment that pressure faltered. What once looked like strength became fragility. As central coordination weakened, regional power hardened. Provincial elites learned to operate independently. Revenue was retained locally. Authority became personal rather than imperial. The tax system had trained elites to extract efficiently. Now it trained them to detach. This was not rebellion at first. It was autonomy in practice. Decisions were made locally. Obligations to the center became conditional. The empire still existed as an idea, but coordination no longer flowed through it. When external invasions arrived, they did not strike a weak empire. They struck an unaligned one. Resources still existed. Armies still existed. Revenue could still be raised. What no longer existed was shared commitment. Provinces hesitated to mobilize. Commanders weighed local survival against imperial obligation. Coordination collapsed under pressure. Invasion accelerated breakdown. It did not create it. The system had already lost cohesion. The Mughal Empire did not fall because taxation failed. It fell because taxation worked too well for too long. Every response to strain relied on the same logic. Extract more, move faster, push harder. Each solution deepened the same distortion. Every attempt to preserve strength weakened cohesion further. There was no alternative path inside the system. The system could not bend without breaking. By this stage, the empire's institutions still knew how to extract. They no longer knew how to stop. Every routine pushed pressure forward. Every incentive rewarded continuation. No office gained authority by slowing the system down. No official advanced by restoring balance. The tax apparatus could only move in one direction. Forward meant more extraction. Pause meant loss of control. There was no neutral gear. What had once been flexibility hardened into momentum, and momentum, without coordination, became danger. The system kept moving, not because it was stable, but because stopping had become impossible. If you're someone who likes seeing how systems quietly shape collapse, how incentives matter more than heroes or villains, like the video and subscribe. This channel is built for that way of seeing history. The Mughal tax system did not destroy the empire by failing. It destroyed it by succeeding in a way that made adaptation impossible.